So we're going to continue looking at Ephesians, and we're in chapter 5, and we're looking at verse 4, 1 to 4, and we're going to consider really attitudes towards sex in this section. And Paul's continuing on his train of thought. He's really continuing on from chapter 4, verse 1, where he tells us to walk worthy. We are still kind of continuing that kind of whole idea of thought about what it means to walk worthy. And so the first thing he encourages the Ephesians to do is to be imitators of God. And, you know, there's a lot of talk these days, isn't there, about the idea that we need to find ourselves. But we don't need to find ourselves. What we need to do is to find God or find Jesus and to imitate him as beloved children. So I want my children to copy the way that I live and to grow up and to imitate my behaviour. And if they can't imitate my behaviour, then really, you know, I'm not being a very good father. And so we are to walk in love. And again, love is this, Paul repeats again and again, this idea of love is our motivation. So we are motivated by love. And this becomes really important when we talk about sex in a minute. And the example of love is Christ. As Christ loved us. And how did Christ love us? We're going to see this a bit further down in chapter 5 when we talk about marriage. He gave himself up for us. Right, he was willing to die for us, and that was a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. God loves it when we give ourselves up for him. And so this is the example of love. Love is selfless. It's not pursuing our own ends, it's pursuing the ends of God. But what we see in the next few verses is really the contrast of love to lust. And these verses here talk really about not love or really lust. And this is the way the world sees love. You see, because what the world says is that love, providing love is the motivation, it's acceptable to kind of do whatever makes you happy. So if you are, you know, cheating on your wife or your husband, but it's because you love somebody else, well, surely that's fine. You know, or, you know, if you kind of need to find your needs met in other places, you know, but, you know, it's all because, you know, for the sake of love, it's okay. Or if you are desiring something else or somebody else, you know, in the name of love, it's okay. And really what the world does is, rather than the pure love, which comes, you know, the pure love which comes from God, we end up with this fake love, which is really just an excuse for lust. And he's basically saying, don't let that be the way among you. Now, what we have to remember here is that in Ephesus at the time, there was a lot of idol worship or god worship, or particularly the goddesses, and there were temples which were incredibly debauched, and really where sex was a regular part of their rituals and their routines. And so they were in a sexually absolutely kind of, if you think our culture is sex saturated, well, their culture was also sex saturated. And so what Paul is challenging them on is basically, don't be like the world, which is sex saturated. Be pure like God. And he's actually saying this verse 4 is really kind of challenging our attitude to sex. And there, rather than turning sex into a joke where it's filthy or it's foolish or it's crude joking, he's saying no, instead let there be thanksgiving, rather than it being sex being something that you joke about as almost being dirty or kind of underhanded or wrong. It's not wrong, it's absolutely right. Sex was God's idea and is a beautiful expression of love as God has intended. When done correctly, sex is a beautiful expression of love, and for that we should give thanks. Now, we aren't not to just have no fun at all. It's not saying that joking is wrong, but it's the crude element. It's the foolishness, it's the filthiness that God is wanting to remove from our lives. And so this would have been a great challenge to them, to have the proper attitude towards love and sex. And I suppose the challenge for us is not to be prudish, is not to be, looking at sex. Sex is not wrong. It's not wrong. Actually, it's wonderfully right in the context of marriage as God has intended. Sex, in the context of true love, is actually a God thing. And so we should have a good attitude towards sex, and we shouldn't be treating it as silly or bad or wrong, but be giving thanks for it and have attitudes which are thankful to God for creating love that is selfless like Christ was.